Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, bonjour, good morning and welcome to the opening session of this year's French-Australian Forum on Water and Land Management. My name is Katherine Daniell and I'm a research fellow here at the Australian National University and one of the conveners of this forum. First of all, this morning, we acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people, past and present. Before the proceedings begin, I would also like to give our sincere thanks for the financial and in-kind support we have received for the development of this forum, in particular from the French Embassy, l'Institut Français, IRSTEA, the UNESCO Chair on Water Economics and Transboundary Water Governance, the ANU College of Arts and Social Sciences, the ANU Water Initiative, the ANU Centre for European Studies and the CSIRO. I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Eric Lithander, Pros Vice Chancellor, International and Outreach.
Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning to ANU on this uncharacteristically grey and wet Canberra morning. For those of you who have travelled to be here, our friends who live here will tell you that Canberra winters are usually clear and crisp and sunny. Hopefully that we'll get back to that in a few days. Ambassador and distinguished guests and colleagues and friends from the Australian government, students and friends of ANU, welcome. Delighted to welcome you to the French-Australian Forum on Water and Food Security, Shaping Land Use Futures. The ANU is recognised internationally as Australia's leading university. And we have particularly long-standing record of excellence in water, landscape and environmental management, international development and policy. And much of this work is carried out in collaboration with international partners, many of them, of course, with our French colleagues, many of whom are here today. We have researchers across all of our 7 colleges working in these areas, including large numbers in the Crawford School of Public Policy, which is the school you're in at the moment, which is hosting us in this beautiful building. The location of ANU in the national capital, and for those of you who have travelled here, hopefully, if the weather improves, you'll have the opportunity to see a little bit of our capital. Our location in the capital enables us also to have very strong relationships with the Australian government and the Australian Public Service and the Diplomatic Corps, which ensures that our researchers can make the best use of international collaboration, which is an international priority for us. This forum and the overarching French-Australian initiative on water and land management is an excellent example of how significant international research programs can be driven forward in collaboration. Also, French businesses like Veolia and Suez Degremont and research organizations such as IRSTEA, CIRAD, IRD, INRA, and the CNRS are globally acknowledged as leaders in water, environment, and agricultural management and research. So it's a natural fit for us, and we're very pleased to be working with these organizations. We very much value the opportunity that this initiative provides for us to further strengthen our relationships between French and Australian researchers and to drive future research between a range of partners, including all those that are here today. I'm particularly grateful to the French Embassy and to IRSTEA for their sustained contribution and support for the development of this initiative and the forum. And it's now my great pleasure to invite His Excellency the Ambassador to address us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I really need a microphone today. I'm sorry, I came back from Paris just some days ago with a terrible cold, and so I will try to do my best with the limited voice today to say a few words for the opening of this important seminar. First, it's always a pleasure to come here at the ANU. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Eric, for your kind words. And it's especially a pleasure to come here at the Crawford School. I just mentioned to Eric that, when was it, probably 6 months ago, there was an official opening of this Crawford School with the Prime Minister, and it's a pleasure to be back on this wonderful premise. May I welcome also this morning representatives from various institutions, academic institutions, centers of research, Australian, Canberra, ANU, and also from France. And I would like also to address a special welcoming to my, I would say, French citizens, those who have come from far, from France, Marseille, Paris, and those who have come from France, but a bit closer, those coming from New Caledonia. And you have mentioned, Eric, the participation of key research institutions like CIRAD, IRSTEA, and CNRS. And I'm very glad those representatives are here with us today. And I would like also to acknowledge the presence of representatives of some French companies specialized in water management, which are strongly present here in Australia, especially Veolia, Suez Environnement, and De Gremont. Of course, today I will absolutely not make any comments on scientific angle. I would be completely unable of that. My only, I would say, comments today would be comments as a diplomat. I'm just a generalist with very, I would say, general average knowledge of this very important issue, which is the one about food and water security. I just want to make a few remarks on how we see those issues of food safety and water security. I think if you see the challenges we have to face, the range of challenges our governments have to face, certainly the issues of food safety, water security are ranging, I would say, at the top of those challenges, I would say on an emergency basis, but also on a long-term perspective. Just a few I would say figures, or not figures, but thoughts about those challenges we have to face all together. In terms of water security, I'm sure you are all very familiar with all these figures. I took them from international reports from the United Nations, and I'm sure that it will not be new for you, but I think these figures are very key to better comprehend the challenges of water security and food safety. In terms of water security, today we still have 900 million people who still do not have access to drinkable water. So this represents something like, I don't know, probably 35% of the, not 35%, but 1/10 or 1/10 of the world population. And those people are mainly located in Africa and in Asia. Worst, if you look at the number of people in terms of access to sanitation, you have today 2.6 billion people, which represent about 1/3 of the world population, who do not have access to basic water sanitation. And of course, this has tremendous impact, especially on health, and the figures in terms of children affected by the lack of access to children's sanitation are absolutely incredible. The latest figures show that you have 1.5 million children who die every year because of infections, diarrhea, disease due to insane water. So this is an issue in terms of access, but also this is an issue in terms of world health, especially children health. In terms of food security, I would say the figures and the records are not really bright. You have still today 800 million people who are considered as being chronically underfed. And if you see the evolution of this population, the number of people still underfed is not decreasing. Once again, in terms of food security, the children are paying the highest price. I think this is assessed that about 200 million children are affected or face stunted growth, once again, mainly in Africa and in Asia. Of course, we decided, the international community, to try to cope with this issue of food safety and water security. You are probably aware that two of the Millennium Development Goals are focused on those two issues, but the results are quite disappointing. And today, the two Millennium Development Goals, which were, fixed for access to water and access to food, will not be met by 2015. As you know, in the field of food, it was decided that by 2015, under how can I say, chronicle sous-alimentation, how do you say that in English? Underalimented would be reduced by half, but it will not be met by 2015. And also in water security, reducing by half by 2015 the non-access to drinkable sources will not be met. So this is the sign that the international commitment to try to cope with these two challenges, water security and food security, are still ahead of us. Those challenges, when you look at the situation, the situation is probably going to get worse and worse in the time ahead of us. We can say today that these challenges are going to be aggravated in the coming years. First, due to the demographic and urban pressure. Just one figure, which is absolutely striking. In 30 years' time, the catchments of water have been multiplied by 3, by a factor of 3. And if you look at the evolution for the coming year, there is a figure which shows that water catchment, of drinkable catchment, will be multiplied by another factor of 3, not in 30 years, but in 15 years, which is the sign that tensions on water resources and tensions on access to drinkable water will rise in dramatic proportions. And in the food sector too, the pressure of demography and urban pressure will also increase. By 2050, there is a figure which I found in a United Nations report, which shows that the demand for food product will increase by 60% in the forthcoming decades. So more pressure due to this need in terms of water and this in terms of food, more tensions, more pressure in terms on land resources. So I think that the topic of your seminar today is very important. How can we cope with these tensions on water and food in terms of management of land resources? But not only we have to face demographic and urban pressure, we have also to face the impact of climate change on water cycle and on food cycle. These phenomena are, of course, very well known to you, so I will not bring anything new to your debate. But we have to take into consideration that our countries in the developed world, but also in the underdeveloped world, will face extreme climate phenomenon, more droughts, probably in Australia too, more floods, probably in Europe. And you know that today in Europe we are facing huge floods, especially in Central Europe. And these are extreme climate events which will occur more and more regularly. And we have, to face the consequence of such extreme weather phenomena. The second impact of climate change, which I think will be very important for all our societies, will have to face more, what we call in your language, in your research programs, more hydric stress in the context of resources getting more and more scarce. Just one figure, which I think is very topical. In 2030, almost half of the world population, 47%, due to a recent report of the United Nations, will live in areas which will be attached or which will be affected by hydric stress. Half of the population of the world will live in areas affected by hydric stress. This is, of course, a figure which is absolutely outstanding. So what are the answers, and what can we do to try to cope with these phenomenon? The first response is, of course, we'll have to go through more international cooperation. It's very important that a seminar like the one you will have for those 2 days take place in a year, I think year 2013 has been declared by the United Nations as the year of water cooperation. This will require more mobilization, more international cooperation. We'll have also to be very clear, and we'll have to spend more money, more resources, more aid program on water security and on food safety. It will be a key priorities for our aid agencies. Today, we are working closer between the French aid agency, Agence Française de Développement, and the Australian one, OSAID. We consider, and I've seen this figure in reports of development agencies, that 25% of the cost of adaptation to climate change in the coming years will have to be spent in the field of water systems, securing more secure networks, water networks, and also digging more wells. So I think in the coming years we'll have to dedicate more and more resources in terms of water security. So more international cooperation is certainly a key in terms of addressing those challenges. And I would say also more and more bilateral exchanges. I just mentioned what we do together between France and Australia, between our two aid agencies. But I think that such a seminar, putting in common scientists, experts, is very important to better comprehend the phenomena we'll have to face, and also to define what kind of scientific programs we can define together. Our two countries have many things in common, in fact, in terms of food and water security, and the impact of those challenges on the land management. I think our two countries have very strong public policies in that regard, strong public institutions. In France, we have, of course, what we call the Agence de Bassin. I don't know how we can translate it in English, but water basins regulatory agencies. You have such agencies also here in Australia, and I think comparing our models. Comparing the way of those public agencies work, I think is an issue of importance between our two countries. Our two countries also have very strong research capacities in the field of water, agriculture, and land management. And I think pooling our research capacities is something very, very important. And I understand also that in Australia there is a rise in public awareness on these issues of food security and and water safety. I think in France this is already the case, but I think this issue of outreach and trying to better share with our public opinions the outcome, the challenges in the field of food and water security is something we have the responsibility to do all together. We still have some efforts to do. I have seen a statistic which is quite striking. In France, the water consumption for each per capita represents something like 530 cubic meter a year. In Australia, this is double. The latest figures show that per capita water consumption in Australia is 900 cubic meter. We have reduced in France such water consumption. In Australia, I think more efforts have to be made also to reduce such a pressure on the water resources, and probably such a seminar could be a good occasion to see what kind of concrete means can be proposed to our authorities to reduce water consumptions in our two countries. So I think it's a good opportunity, to have such a seminar to discuss those very strategic central issues. I understand this is the second time such a seminar is organized. We had a first edition, when was it? Last year in France, 2 years ago in France. And I hope this forum would be an occasion of exchange of practices, exchange of data, exchange of policies, and also exchange of research programs. As far as the French embassy here is concerned, we are absolutely convinced that such a seminar is key in terms of scientific cooperation between France and Australia. We are very happy to have contributed to the financing, to the organization of such a seminar, and you can count on us to continue ahead with you and to continue supporting such initiatives. Sorry once again for my poor voice. I suggest the next seminar can have a theme concentrated on winter in Canberra and pharmaceutical cooperation between France and Australia. I wish you the best. I would be very happy to welcome you tomorrow at the French residence to continue and to close our seminar with a small reception at the French embassy. And for these 2 days, enjoy your seminar. And I wish you the best for this forum. Thank you very much.
Well, Your Excellency, on behalf of ANU, but also of everyone here today, thank you very much for your time today and for your support and the embassy's support with this forum. We genuinely appreciate it. I agree entirely, and I think all of us agree with you that international cooperation will be the key to addressing many of these issues. At ANU, we have a range of institutes and centres and initiatives focused on this area, such as, of course, our various research schools, but also the ANU Water Initiative, the Food Policy Institute, which was only launched last week, the ANU Centre for European Studies, the Development Policy Institute, and our UNESCO Chair on Water Economics and Transboundary Water Governance, all of which are playing an important role and will continue to play an important role in contributing to this work. We're, of course, very keen to strengthen our relationships with France and with all the institutions here today. So I thank you again for coming. I wish you a very productive couple of days, and I very much look forward to hearing the outcomes and to continue to supporting this activity going forward. Thank you very much.
Better? Okay, so this morning the idea is to have a little bit more of a discussion around some of those major challenges that the Ambassador has set forward for us. We're very lucky to have a very interesting collection of panellists here today. And what we were planning to do this morning is just to ask each of our panellists to give us a few introductory remarks on some of the work that they are doing or their institution is doing in food and water security and how that's shaping land use futures. So we'll give each of our panellists about 5 minutes of introductory remarks, and then we'll move the discussion on to look at some of those examples of collaboration, how we may collaborate more effectively in the future. So our first panellist is Professor Quentin Grafton, one of my fellow co-conveners of this forum. Quentin is a Professor of Economics here at the Crawford School of Public Policy. He is also the Chairholder of the UNESCO Chair in Water Economics and Transboundary Water Governance and Director of the ANU Centre for Water Economics environment and policy. So, Quentin, would you like to start us off?
Thanks very much, Katherine, and thanks for everyone for coming, and special welcome to our French friends who've travelled a great distance. I know someone's come from New Caledonia, which is still a considerable distance, nevertheless, certainly compared to my travels. So 5 minutes. So I have 5 points, which I think follow on from the ambassador's comments, and I'll try and weave it into a story about what we're doing in the UNESCO chair here at the ANU. So the 5 points. First one is food and water security doesn't just happen. It'd be nice if it did. It just fell off a tree or something like that and landed in our laps, and we didn't have to worry about it. But it doesn't just happen. It's a function of trade policy, what we do in terms of food exports. It's a function in terms of what we do in terms of our investments in basic research. It's a function of what we do in terms of water management. So it has all those dimensions that require public intervention in various shapes and forms. The second point is the déjà vu, in the sense that I raised this last week at the Food Policy Institute. Back in 1973, we had a world food crisis. There are a variety of reasons for that, but we dealt with it. We had a huge increase in grain production over the last 40 years, and we've had calorie per capita calorie intake increase about 15%, 40% plus in the East Asia, and about 5% or so in Africa. Regardless, it was across the board increases over the last 40 years. So we met that challenge, and we did it in a variety of different ways. We'll have to do it in different ways as we go for the next 40 years. So the third issue is the food gap, and the ambassador did mention this out to 2050, and there's various numbers out there, and that's part of, I think, the issue that we want to talk through in the next couple of days. What is the demand gap? So we look at the minimum, it's 30% increase in food production required to 2050. Could be upwards of 70%, and if you want to take a number in between, it's 50%. But regardless, it's a major challenge to meet that food gap. We've got an increased population, we're going to have an increase in incomes, and we're also going to have, no doubt, a change in diets, which will have implications in terms of the requirements for food, in fact, increasing the requirements for food. The fourth issue is the yield gap. So the food gap is the challenge from the demand. The yield gap is actually how do we deliver it. We really don't have extensive pieces of land that are available to us to utilize. Most of that land has already been utilized, and if we were to access land that's not currently in production in terms of agriculture, then that will generate a whole range of external costs for us. Climate change is one of them, but it goes well beyond that. So it has to be about sustainable intensification. Yields growth is in fact decreased. Okay, yield growth is still positive, but it has in fact decreased. So that's certainly a challenge to increase the yield growth over the coming decades. And then the fifth point is the water gap. It's no surprise to anyone here, of course, crops need water, and they need water in terms of rain-fed crops, but also in terms of irrigation. So that's going to be a major challenge. Again, the ambassador pointed out that to us. We've got to face that challenge globally. We have to face that challenge here in Australia. So those are the 5 key points. Where does the UNESCO chair lead into this? The UNESCO chair here is based at the ANU. It's been running for a little over 3 years now. It's got another year to go and has the potential of being renewed. We've been focusing our work in Africa. We've been working with various individuals and various organizations in Southern Africa. So we've been looking at taking the learnings we have here and what the learnings are in Africa in terms of water economics. Water economics is my particular area of expertise, but we have Daniell Connell is here. Jamie Pittock is, in fact, was also associated with the UNESCO chair, is in fact in Africa right now, working on agricultural and water issues in Mozambique. We're looking at connecting the water, the food, and the economic issues and the governance issues collectively. We've done a number of activities in Southern Africa in terms of teaching activities, mentoring activities. We've done a number of activities which have been funded by ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, working on the issues of green and blue water and sustainable use of water, and the use of taking into account the issues of the costs associated with agricultural development and taking those into account in terms of the environment. So that's my 5 minutes. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Quentin. I think there's a nice number of things that we can already see that Australia, your centre, is doing. I'd now like to invite my next fellow co-convener of this forum, Olivier Barreteau. Olivier is the director, or to-be director of the IRSTEA, which is the French joint research group on water management and stakeholders. He comes from IRSTEA in France, and has many years of experience looking at all sorts of different parts of hydrology and modelling, often in Africa and other places. So, Olivier.
Thank you. Thank you, Katherine. So yeah, I'm coming from IRSTEA, and I'm very glad to be here with my French colleagues since it comes after our initial workshop 2 years ago in France, in Montpellier. And so I'm glad to see that the dynamics go on. And so I will, in our first forum, we shared experience between research in Australia on land and water issues and research in France on land and water issues. And this first forum was based a lot from contribution of a French research program on land and water, funded by the French Ministry of Environment, IRSTEA and CNRS. So now I'm also taking the hat of manager of this program. And so I will give you some update on the research within this program. So for those who were not in Montpellier 2 years ago, this program started in 2006 or 2007, and it aims at understanding the dynamics of these complex systems which associate land and water, and how land part and water part co-evolve. It also aims at providing support to public policy, so it's really embedded in public policies. And each project funded under this program has its own partnership with local public policy stakeholders. It's funding 19 projects for about 6 million euros, and with yearly workshops of exchanges between all the research projects. And this year, the next workshop will be in October, and also aiming at tackling the issue of agriculture in the land and water issues. I won't get into the details of all the projects, but among them, we are mainly focusing on French issues, so it's really a French program. But also there has been 2 projects, and Jean was part of them, in Kenya. And the topics go from wetland governance to domestic water conservation in relation with agriculture, or also on long-range evolution of river basins with an interface between water and society, and also specific issues on the place of scientists and expertise in putting up the development of land development. Initial lessons of these projects are that the connection between land and water is really place-based and contingent to the relations which have been built in the past between a society and its environment. And so that means that if you want to understand how you may use water in one place, in order to ensure water security or use water for food security, you have to understand this relation. And so that means we need to understand the sense of place, and probably we have to learn some of what you've done here with work, and I think Anne maybe will tell about her experience on that, taking the sense of place and the identity of a land. There's the issue of land control, which is behind, obviously. In this project, the food and the farming is actually quite not that much present, or only as a sectoral issue. And I think that's one of the main challenge for our seminar these 2 days, is to reintegrate the food production and agriculture within this systemic view of land and water. And the reason for that is that farming is considered like a specific industry. It's either considered as a specific industry with a worldwide view, so how we can do business and sell our crops all over the world, so it's not anymore place-based. How we can collectively act to feed the whole population, as you mentioned, and as Mr. Ambassador mentioned prior to our panel. And again, it's not place-based, it's just we have the global responsibility of feeding the world. But also there is another trend which is fast emerging in France, but I think also in Australia and in many parts of the developed world. This is a trend of local food production, what in French we name circuit court, where the aim is to produce locally, to eat locally. And each food crisis we have, the last one we had in Europe with meat, it increased the demand for locally produced food. So there is these two trends which need to take their place in these land and water complex systems. So I think that's my main points for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier, and I hope that some of those comments will probably be taken up by Anne, our next speaker. We're very happy to have Dr. Anne Poelina here all the way from the Kimberley region this morning. She's the Managing Director of Majula Incorporated, and she's also a Fellow of the Peter Cullen Water and Environment Trust, and of course Nikina, traditional owner of the Lower Mardudhara in the Fitzroy River in the West Kimberley in Western Australia. Anne is a well-known defender of Aboriginal rights in Australia and was a signatory of the Redstone Statement in 2010. Last year she was invited to talk at the Human Rights Commission in UNESCO in Paris and has presented at various conferences in Paris, and often she uses film for some of her work. So we're looking very forward to hearing some remarks.
Hello. Ngajinu nilawala and Polina ngai imaro manan ngai mandajara nyigana ngai nyigana nganga ngai mabo nganga nyinga Canberra ngano French ngano mabo nyanda. Good morning. My name is Anne Poelina. I'm a traditional owner from the Kimberley. Imatawara means people who belong to the Lower Fitzroy River. I would like to thank Katherine for this opportunity to come to Canberra. I'm out there, I fund a not-for-profit organisation, and I think what I'm appreciating is an opportunity not just to have dialogue, but to grow this into dialogic action. So yes, last year I did go to France and travelled and presented at UNESCO and went to Montpellier and travelled right throughout the east of France. And I think one of the things that many of the French people were quite surprised about was, to some extent, how Australia, in some instances of land and water management, is ignoring international evidence, ignoring better practice when it comes to working with Australians. So what I want to put on the table is that if we are to go forward in a spirit of cooperation, it must be based on mutual trust and respect. And we must be honest about how we enter the dialogue if we are to create this transformational change. So in terms of a sense of place, people would say, Indigenous Australians. I think people, when I travelled the world, people are quite surprised that there is this concept of Indigenous people in Australia. What does that mean? It means that we are the first people in this country. We are the first people, the Indigenous people, who have lived here for thousands and thousands of years. My people who are the water people. We know all of these things. We know that our coexistence is heavily reliant on the balance between social, cultural, human and environmental capital. We coexist with the birds, with the animals, with the snakes, with all of those things. So for us, our well-being is not just about the individual. It is about a holism and a collectivism. And what I say for Indigenous people is that our knowledge is grounded in lived experience over millennia. And there's much that we can share and teach not only Australians but the world. When we look at the indigenous people around the world, we occupy 24% of the landmass, but within that landmass, there's 84% of biodiversity, and that is not a coincidence. We are there because we are custodians of these creatures that I talk about, and it is about balance and it is about living in harmony. So in regards to France, France is about over 500,000 square kilometres. The Kimberley is over 400,000 square kilometres. To travel to the nearest town south is 6 hours in a car. To travel to the closest one to the north is 2 hours. So I just want to give you a bit of appreciation in regards to the location and the remoteness of the context in which I live, in which I operate. Last year, the Kimberley, in 2011, the Kimberley was registered on the National Heritage Trust, and it was registered because of the coexistence of all sorts of people that have come to the Kimberley to call the Kimberley their home. With the Kimberley, within the Kimberley, there are geographical regions, the hill country, which is made of mountains, the river country, the coast, the desert. So there are Aboriginal people from great diversity who have got so much to share. And I guess one of the messages from the old people is no river, no people. And it is so important that we as Indigenous people, not only here in Australia, but around the world, we still have a role to play. And we're saying that we're coming with our open hand and our open heart. And we in Australia, just in terms of international visitors, you may not be aware, but Indigenous people in remote areas live in fourth world conditions. Our life expectancy is 20 to 30 years less than most Australians. Most people in my family have died by the time they are 50. And this is just to give you some context in terms of what we're saying is that we are out there. We are a people who can bring much to this dialogue. And as I said, it can't just be about dialogue. It must be about action. So, as I said, the Kimberley is an amazing place. It's very interesting. We have had French filmmakers coming to the Kimberley because many of you may not be aware, or you may have heard, James Price Point. It was going to be the biggest industrial gas precinct in the world, bigger than Qatar. But because people have mobilised, because people have come from all over the world to support us, one of the big things that people said is that it wasn't the people, it was the economic international climate that turned it around. But we are standing not as protesters, but as protectors of the wilderness that we love. So it is very, very important. In regards to Indigenous people across Northern Australia, we are talking about a savanna system that goes from Broome to Cairns. We are talking about a savanna system that we are looking very hungrily to the south for how can we learn from what has been happening with the Murray-Darling Basin. We had the Northern Development Task Force a couple of years ago that came up and said, do not look at the Kimberleys and the Northern Territory as the next food bowl. It is a finger bowl. Okay, so we need to learn from the science. We need to learn by a collaboration with different parties. In regards to Northern Australia, there's an organisation called the Northern Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Alliance. It is including Indigenous people from right across the north. We have developed Indigenous policies around water. We are passionate about trying to secure water rights in this country, around strategic Indigenous reserves, all of those things, cultural values. We are struggling with environmental flows in this country, and can you imagine how difficult it is to get on the agenda cultural values? So these are the things that are out there. So, my lived experience, people say, what are you? And I do not say I'm an activist, I say I'm an actionist. I do not want just activism, I want action. So that is how I describe myself. So in regards to Western Australia, the biggest state in this country, what have I witnessed? What I've witnessed now is that, when the Labor government was in some years ago, they developed world's best practice with the Sustainability Development Framework. Since the Liberal government have come in, there has been no investment in that area. What I have seen in WA is that the West Australian government is now becoming a proponent for mining. They are changing and putting in through acts of parliament bills that enshrine the rights of the corporation over ordinary people. So these are the sorts of things that we're working with. So we were working, in terms of cross-exchange of information, but the reality is we are being driven not by evidence for best practice, but by a political paradigm that is in charge not just of Indigenous people, But we are losing our land and water sovereignty in this country to the corporations. And I think what we need to look at is the international context of globalisation and the way that, you know, the corporations are now colonising ordinary Australians, colonising the land, colonising the water. So we need to look at this. And I guess one of the things I'm saying is that Western Australia is introducing what they're calling planning reform. So what that means is that with the state government, they introduce new planning regimes that now override local government. So there are things being introduced called the Development Assessment Panel. Anything over $3 million no longer goes through the local government. It goes to the state to make decisions. Any industrialisation, any development, all of that. So we are seeing those sorts of things. We are seeing planning laws called improvement plans, improvement schemes, where the state government comes up into the local government area and excises out the land that they want for development. So we have to be realistic, we have to be truthful, and we have to say that we are working with within a political context that needs to be grounded in good science, that needs to be fully there, extending their hand to Indigenous people in a true partnership for how we move forward. There is no free, prior and informed consent decision-making when we do this, because why? Indigenous people are being used as part of the process to oppress other Australians, as part of the process to get agreements up through mining and those sorts of things. So it's very, very important that we look at what are the alternatives. After 30 or 50 years of mining and resource extraction, what happens then when the land, when the water and all of that is destroyed, when the food is destroyed? So what I want to put on the table is that we are working in a conflict paradigm, and I think it's time that we are here and we see the Kimberley as world assets, that we sit around the table as world citizens in a context of how do we start to do business differently. And my plea is, how do we move from a conflict paradigm to a cooperative paradigm? And what I'm saying is that Indigenous people are there. We are doing very good work in Australia, and there needs to be recognition that we still have a role to play. And so we extend this arm and this hand in friendship, and we open our heart and say that there's so much that we can tell you. You know, in regards to water connectivity, we can be way into the desert and my old people will sing the song and they will tell you how that water travels underground. They will tell you about the connectivity. They will tell you that when we talk about aquifers and ancient waters, we talk about old water. So we are wise people and we want to be able to extend in friendship this opportunity to collaborate. The Kimberley is an amazing area and it is there and it is a blank canvas. If it is a greenfield area to the mining development, it is a greenfield area for scientists. So thank you for this opportunity and I hope that we can move forward in a spirit of cooperation and look at how do we do business differently in the north and how can we learn and share what we have as human beings in creating a greater humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for all of your words, and I hope that we will be able to move from conflict to cooperation and actually get to the action. It's extremely important, and we hope that will come out of this first dialogue and the Australian to actually work. Our next panellist is Dr. John Aubergil, who is a senior scientist in hydrology at IRD, and over the past decade he has held a number of other positions in the Institute as Deputy Director of the Water and Soils Program and the IRD representative for East Africa on the International Campus of University in Kenya. Since 2006 he has been the Coordinator of European Affairs at IRD and he's stationed in Marseille, so we're very happy to have him here today.
Thank you very much, Katherine. And it's my great pleasure to be here to tell you some words about my institution, IRD, and I want to thank you, Katherine, and thank Olivier for the invitation. IRD, the French Institute of Research for Development, is a French governmental research organization under the joint authority of two ministries, the Ministry of Higher Education and Research and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It develops research and training programs in partnership with developing countries to address international development issues in respect with the Millennium Development Goals, the MDG. Emphasizing interdisciplinarity, IRD has focused its research for over 65 years on relationship between man and its environment. and perhaps we are discovering a little bit later what the people from Kimberley know from so long. We are in Africa, in Mediterranean, in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Pacific and Ancillary countries, and the French tropical overseas territories. IRD is hosting 3 scientific departments and 1 agency for funding issues. The 3 departments are the first one on environment and natural resources, the second on health, and the third on social sciences and humanities. These 3 departments and the agency combine their efforts to promote consortia and platform on research for food and water security, and also on nutritional aspects as a complement very important to food and water security, and this in a context of climate change. We have developed a partnership platform called SREC, for Rural Societies, Environment and Climate Change in West Africa. In East Africa, we have a research platform in partnership with these countries called EREGO, for Heritage, Resource and Governance. And we try to study and to promote traditional knowledge on water and food security. And in East Asia, we have also a platform. This one supported by an EU funding called Smiling, and working on nutritional security and on biosafety, and almost also on biosafety on water, problem of pesticide in the water. On the innovation side, we can quote several results. For water security, for example, we promote in West Africa and East Africa the concept of artificial flooding to secure the ecosystem services of flooded areas, and I will speak about that tomorrow. We have also some partnership in entrepreneurial what do you call this, to have some incubators of entreprise. And one incubator in Senegal, in ODEV, is an initiative between the Université Cheikh Anta Diop of Dakar and IRD. And we had some results, and we have some enterprise in fish farming, for example, it's a link between food and water security in Africa. And also IRD worked a lot on biotechnology, on food biotechnology, plant biotechnology, to improve the gene banks of African varieties, and also for safety and for nutrition. We had the famous plum peanut, who saved so many children during the last famine in the Horn of Africa. Perhaps before some figures, in 2012, IRD was a budget of 227 million euro, including 26.2 million revenue from external contracts and approved products, and the main part directly from grants from the French government. We are 2,346 staff, including 842 PhD scientists. 43% of the staff is posted abroad and depend of 32 permanent representation all over the world. and I was this representative for East Africa during 6 years. Since the 19, IRD is also collaborating with the other scientific advanced nations to develop trilateral scientific cooperation with developing and emerging countries. And it is in this framework that Australian National University and IRD are partners in the PASNet project. Katherine know it very well, which is an Inconet coordination action supported by the European Commission. Its main goal is to strengthen bi-regional sustainable dialogue on science and technology between Europe and the Pacific. This project is ending next September, but a new project is coming, always under the 7th framework program, and will begin next October for 3 years, excuse me. And it's called PASNet Plus. And why Plus? Because it will focus on these 3 major societal challenges for Pacific region. The first societal challenge is health, demographic change, and well-being. The second, food security, sustainable agriculture, and bioeconomy. And the third one, climate action, resource efficiency, and raw material. That is our cooperation in the region, but perhaps we can do more, and we can have, through this kind of seminar and through the French embassies, to look how we can develop our partnership in the other developing country, and almost in Africa, where the climate are similar in Africa and in Australia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's nice to also hear of the Pacific. We've heard a lot about Africa, but it's nice to have the Pacific present here as well today. We're now going to move on, stay with the development sector, and we're lucky to have Marcus Howard here from AusAid, the Australian Agency for International Development. He's the Senior Sectorial Specialist for Water and has worked in a diverse range of roles on aid programs in Asia, Pacific, Africa and the Middle East, including in post-conflict and emergency situations. So Marcus, thank you very much for everything.
Thanks, Katherine, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. What I'd like to talk about today is just touching on themes of Australia and France as donors working towards global poverty reduction goals. And mirroring what the Ambassador said before, the Guardian newspaper recently reported that the majority of 9 billion people on Earth will live with severe pressure on fresh water within the space of 2 generations as climate change, pollution and overuse of resources take their toll. And of course, most of this impact will fall on the poor, and particularly in fragile states. So there's a need for donors like Australia and France to work to support management issues in fragile states, low and middle income countries. Also not forgetting, while middle income countries like Vietnam and Indonesia and others have certainly got resources. There's certainly a lot of issues, including resource management, where countries like Australia and France can make a contribution to managing the food, energy, water nexus. And as an example of that, I'd like to talk about some of the Australian-supported programs of research in the Pacific, South Asia, in the Mekong and Southern Africa, which can contribute to the development and economic growth of over 1 billion people. Many of these places look to the Australian experience in water resource management, which, as Anne points out, is not perfect, and I think we have to acknowledge that sometimes what we do is not what we say, and also we've also had to learn by doing. In the Mekong, our programs are contributing to the political and economic decision making in the region, which is home to about 260 million people. And their water resources and land use are core to development and will impact on the future livelihoods and quality. And that future livelihood is directly linked to choices which people are currently having to make, governments are having to make them and the people having to make them around economic development and the choices around management of water resources or land for food production, energy and the management of ecosystems. In South Asia, Australia is contributing to what's known as the South Asia Water Initiative, and that's a partnership with the UK, Australia and the World Bank, which is looking at water sharing in the international waterways of the Ganga, Indus and Brahmaputra, which are fed by the Himalayas. So planning decisions there can impact on the lives of over 700 million people, probably 1.5 billion people if you want to look at the wider area. And their economic development, food security requires integrated planning around the issues of food, energy, land and water access. In the Southern African Development Cooperation, there's an overlap here with the work of France through IRD, where we're working with Germany and the UK in the transboundary program, which covers some 15 major transboundary river basins in the area. This is home to over 280 million people, and as indicated, it's an area where climate change impacts are going to be as severe as they are in Australia. But it has poor resilience, so better river basin and land management policy will improve the potential for growth and food security in those areas. A recent development in last week has been the issue of the high-level panel report on the post-2015 development goals, and I'm sure a lot of you may have seen it. You may not have had a chance to read it yet. But it's really important to look at some of the goals in there, how they impact on this topic that we're talking about today. And just as a couple of examples, Goal 5, which is to ensure food security and good nutrition, which is about agricultural productivity and fisheries. Goal 6, universal access to water and sanitation, which is about the sustainable use of water as a resource. And it's also interesting to note that there's actually a link now between poor sanitation and food security through undernutrition, looking at the impacts that poor sanitation actually has on the ability of people in a number of countries to actually ingest and keep the food that they have. And then Goal 9, manage natural resources sustainably, which is about safeguarding ecosystems and improving soil quality. And it's interesting because in one way or another, water and land impact across all those goals. The Asian Development Bank has identified gaps in information which are necessary for setting national targets for water use. And one of the themes of the new goals is, it's called Universal Goals to end poverty by 2030, but setting of national targets. And the setting of national targets, and particularly in areas where we're talking about it, around land and water, needs specific information on water use, information on possible water supplies. So there's a lot of work to be done by donors and scientific communities to support this post-2015 process, and particularly in providing an evidence base for target setting around those food and water-related goals. So I think that's enough, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you very much to all of our panellists. I think we can already see that there are some key themes coming out here. We've obviously got the serious global challenges of sustainable development that are at the forefront, and a real need to improve our integrated and holistic management of places with the people that are there. So the next part of our discussion is to try to think about what are some of the specific topics, specific questions, specific places where French and Australian cooperation can be of great value. And so we'd just like to hear just a few comments on that, and I think we might also open it up to the floor for some of the other perspectives on how we may be able to cooperate more effectively into the future so that we can actually lay down an action plan. So I don't know who would like to start with some of the work that has already been going on in French and Australian cooperation, and some of the key research questions you think we really need to treat in that first instance. Who
I'd like to get the audience involved, but just to recap for some of I know a number of people weren't at the Montpellier workshop. I want to give special thanks to Olivier and the team welcoming us there a couple of years ago. We had I think the people from France have the short end of the stick, as we say in English, because you're coming to Canberra in wintertime and we went to Montpellier in summertime. But just to recap, we had I think an interesting set of engagement at that time, and there was a about to be special issue. When's it being released?
Soon, hopefully this year.
Yeah, hopefully this year in Journal of Hydrology, which was led by Olivier and Katherine. And then there's a book that's coming through by Springer Verlag on urban water issues. It's got about 26 chapters or so, I think, Vivian. That's about the last count. We had a target of 35, but that focuses on a whole range of urban water issues with France and Australia. So those are two, I think, accomplishments that have come out of that 2 years, among other activities as well that we've been able to do at an individual or level. So I think that's a useful start, and I think there's more to be done, and I think part of the next couple of days is to think through what we can do, but that's enough for me.
Just to go on with Quentin, as an output of Montpellier workshop, there's also a book on integrated groundwater management with something like 20 or so chapters. Andrew is one of the editors here. And we started the process of another special issue, but in a French-speaking journal, just to be a challenge for you guys, in the journal which is named Participation, which the focus will be on participatory approaches for land and water management. I think one of a very interesting way of collaborating and going further to address questions together is the co-tutel PhD thesis, and Katherine is one live example of what it can be a success of this kind of process, and Emmeline is here, and she's also in this kind of process, and I think it's a very good way to facilitate the exchanges because of the distance. It's difficult to have on a regular basis exchanges, but the PhD student is doing the link, and I think it's something we have to keep going. And as a matter of questions, common questions which can be tackled together, and also as common experience, there's all the issues of global change, which has already been handled before, and there's climate change, as mentioned by the ambassador, but also demographic change and the way towards more urbanization, and also economic change and the need for food. The increase of need for food will impact countries like ours, where farming is a big industry. This raises questions for us as how we can transfer place-based experience. Why we said before that land and water management is really is really contingent to where it's being done, and even if we have a joint context, and climate is one of these contexts, we have to figure out how we can do this transfer. But another way of working together, I think, is to end with that. It's we can still figure out collaboration through projects, and there's the Belmont Forum calls, which may be a way to do it, and also working together through the with the CRP, with the CG system mainly, and Alex, I think, will tell us about this system tomorrow. And also we can have joint sessions and conferences, and I want to make some advertisement for the residence conference next year in Montpellier, where we could have a follow-up of our workshop there.
One of the things, is that on? Can you hear me? one of the things that I want to talk about is we currently have Indigenous people, my people along the river, and the traditional owners along the river. We currently have food and water security. We have, you know, a hybrid economy that sustains us within a welfare economy. So we currently have that. And I guess one of the things I want to say is that I spoke very briefly about James Price Point and possibly there was going to be the opportunity to build the largest LNG precinct in the world there. And because of the people and the mobilisation of the people, that no longer is on the card. But that was looking at a gas reserve within the Browse Basin, around 30 million cubic feet, feet of gas. What we are now going to be seeing in the Kimberley is the exploration of shale gas. And I know, one of the things I saw in France was the response to coal seam gas and the moratoriums that are put on coal seam gas in regards to that. And when we look here in Australia and see all of the international evidence, especially what's coming out of America, it seems like an oxymoron that we are pursuing these sorts of goals in Australia around coal seam gas and shale gas. So I guess one of the things in terms of people would say, well, what's your story? What do you want to do? And what I want to say is that we have an opportunity in the Kimberley, especially in the Super Canning Basin, which holds about 300 million cubic metres of shale gas. We have an opportunity to look at that and say, how do we measure and value the existing assets? We need an asset management framework to value the existing assets. We need an asset management framework that will value cultural capital, human capital, social, environmental, all of these sorts of things before we destroy it. I think people see this concept of wilderness and think that it's an empty place, that it's void of people and all of this biodiversity, but this region is just totally amazing. As I said, we have an opportunity now to prevent the same sort of scenario with the tar sands in Canada. With these assets not only belong to Australians, they belong to the world. And so what I'm putting my hand out for is an opportunity. As I said, I'm just here as an individual. I'm here because I believe that what we have is important for all Australians and indeed the world. And what I'm putting before you is an opportunity to look at some sort of collaboration. I have no money, I only have goodwill. So I'm coming here with a hand out, reaching and saying, look, we have things in the Kimberley, as I said, do not think that you're going to come to the Kimberley and produce the next food bowl, because it ain't going to happen. But what we do have as Indigenous people is that we have a minefield of opportunity for bioprospecting. There is opportunity to look at Indigenous agriculture, to look at plants that we have known for millions of years almost in terms of its values. We have one plant that was taken to the University of Queensland and investigated for 20 years, and the researcher came back and he said, oh, we are so excited. This plant has got 30 times the property of morphine. And we said, yes, that's okay, but we haven't told you it's an analgesic, it's an antiseptic, and it has all of these other properties. So Indigenous people are there. We want to be entrepreneurial. We want to show you this innovation. We want to show you things that can create new business and new opportunities, but it needs to be ethical business. It needs to be done in the right way so that the seed banks aren't controlled by Santos and all of these people, that it belongs to the Australian community. So there's needs to look at how do we protect intellectual property rights? How does something that is native to this country stays within this country? We have one plant that has 50 times the property of vitamin C. It was taken by some of the one of the French cosmetic companies, and is now being propagated in South America. So there's not even the opportunity to continue to have enterprise in that area. So in regards to this, I'm saying that let's measure and value the existing assets before we destroy them in this country. Let's show that we can create a culture conservation economy around good science, around culture, around tourism, around geographical spaces. I mean, the Kimberley is just unbelievably so pristine and so beautiful, and there's so much up there. As I said, it is a greenfield area. It is a clean slate waiting for researchers and academic institutions. And what I say is that there is a duty of care from Australian institutions, from Australian universities, from Australian researchers to come and engage with people, Aboriginal people and other people who live in the region in good faith. One of the things I want to say is that we do need good water governance. It is no longer an Indigenous versus non-Indigenous. It is us as Australians looking at how do we manage and control these assets, not just for now, but for future generations. And as we say, as Indigenous people, we have not inherited this land from our ancestors. We are borrowing it from children not born yet. So we have a duty of care as world citizens to look at how do we reach out and do this. And what I'm saying is that there is a great opportunity for Australian and French researchers, practitioners to come to the Kimberley and support the work we're doing. I have met a colleague, Philippe Villant, who's coming from Nancy too. He's coming with half the money. He's coming next year to come and look at how he can work with us to showcase what we have in the Kimberley. So these opportunities are there. Let's collaborate in good faith and let's protect the assets that we have in this country for not only Australians but for future generations of the world.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to say that I completely agree with Olivier on the importance of these PhD students and to have this share program. And perhaps we can also open these programs not only for French and Australian students, but also for students coming in from the other country where we are working, in Africa or another thing. I guess we had a very good forum for thinking about our cooperation. Is this new project PassNet Plus? PassNet Plus will be for 3 years from October, and yes, it's centered on Europe Pacific region, but we have other INCO projects like this one in the other region where French is participating, and perhaps we can try to see how we can open and to have some links between this other INCONET project. There is one in Sub-Saharan Africa called CASNET, another one for the Mediterranean parts of Africa with MedSpring, and others also in South America. And I agree that the CRP project can be a good framework for our partnership, but the European project also. And I was very interested by the participation of local knowledge and traditional people, and perhaps we can have some exchange about this local knowledge and local, because we have this platform in East Africa working with also people knowing very well their region, like the Maasai or the people from East Africa. And I don't know, I just imagine that today at the instant, perhaps we can have an exchange or something between people from Kimberley and with Maasai, with anthropologists and people to see how they can exchange their traditional knowledge.
Thanks. I'll be quick because I think we want to get to the others in the room. But there's clearly overlap, I think, between Australia and France. There's sort of interest in this area in the Mekong, Southern Africa and the Pacific, where there's an opportunity for dealing with some of the development issues that we can currently see and we know we have to deal with.